Okay, I accidentally turned the video off when I was just trying to move the camera. So let me see if I can get over here where you can, in the sun, I'm having a hard time seeing what I'm looking at here. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that pretty well. Hopefully it's focusing on it, but that's kind of what the divot pattern looked like that I was making. Here's that, this would be kind of from the player's view, and you can see over to the right here, a little more shallow, a little medium divot depth, and then getting steeper. From the down the line view, it looks a little bit more like that. Okay, but that's essentially what's happening at the bottom of the radius where the club's going to interact with the ball. Okay, so that's just me taking the bottom of the hula hoop, the bottom of the swing radius, and moving it like that, right? Super easy to do. Now, you can make it adapt to even a wider set of circumstances, right? So the way to determine if you're really controlling the radius of the club is if I go back to the middle of the dip there where it's neutral, I could start moving, not just shifting how the pelvis and the shoulders relate to each other, but I could actually start moving the entire system laterally this way, like moving the whole system like that, right? So let's say, I wanted to hit a high draw from, up through there, egg beater. I wanted to hit a high draw from the front portion of my stance, but I want to come more from the inside. I don't want to move the ball back in my stance because I'm trying to hit a high 4-iron, like a high draw with a 4-iron, right? So I would need the back half of this divot signature more forward in my stance. So what I'd have to do is I'd have to do this, but the whole system would have to be more to the left, right? So I could put even more axis tilt on it. Okay, so what I would do is set up neutral, right? Go through the neutral divot right here. And then what it would have to look like would be more this way. So this looks the same, but from the face-on view, it would look more like that. It would be more severe. So if I set up and then I try to do that, then it would start to, let me do a few baseline practices. Then I would go like this, okay? Okay? So that's me shifting the system laterally, combining that with what I was doing to have the club bottom out more to the right side of my stance, more to the right. So now this looks more like that. So you can see right here, right, where the divot is relatively shallow, but it's further forward in my stance, and it's still going more out to the right. It's not diving to the left, okay? Down the line view, it looks like that. Okay, so that would be an example of how you could change the low point position and change the angle of attack and change the direction of the baseline or the path, right? So now I'm going to keep trucking and do a bunch of different stuff. So now I'm just going to decide right before I take it back, I'm going to swing back and forth, and right before I get more, I'll try to decide obviously before I get half, because you got to basically, so let me say this part first. So as I'm playing around with different low points, different directions, different angles of attack, the way I'm setting it up, it has to be set up by P5, right? So you come down, P5 right there, right? So you have got, that's all your coordinates for where the club's going to bottom out at the ball pretty much decided at P5, right? So what you're really trying to do from P3, from here, so if I go to P3 up here and then down to P5, that portion P3 to P5 in my transition, that's essentially when I'm setting up, I'm aiming the system, okay? Now you can do things at address to make that less complicated, right? So you wouldn't necessarily, if you're going to hit a high draw with a forehand, you wouldn't necessarily set up dead neutral and then try to make it more complicated from P3 to P5. Like you do certain things yourself to make it so that you didn't have to make that big of adjustments, but it's doable. And you find out how much adjustment you want to make dynamically versus what kind of static alignments you want to take care of before you start moving the club. But essentially, no matter what happens, by the time you get to P5, the party's over as far as where the club's going to bottom out on the ground, which direction to be going. Now, you can still do a little bit with the face angle after P5, but you can't do a lot as far as like the path angle, hit the low point of the swing, the baseline path. Those are almost interchangeable, but not quite. I don't really like think about too much of like a baseline as much of just the flat portion, the low point of the radius of the circle, and then which way is that the tangent point of the low point of the circle where that's pointed. But it's essentially the baseline. So when you have to understand that if you're going to play around with this to kind of work on the dynamics of your swing, you have to have already decided what you're going to do as far as the control of the radius of the swing before you get to P3. Okay, so you can actually be undecided until P3, but at P3 you better start figuring it out, because at P5 it's got to be completely figured out. Okay, so even if I was just swinging back and forth and didn't stop swinging back and forth, by the time the club gets here, I need to decide what I'm going to do. Okay, so that I can aim the system. I need to take the arm and shoulders assembly, and I've got to set the pivot up so that my pelvis and shoulders are in the right spot to deliver the bottom of the radius in a certain place, depending on what I chose. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to start swinging, and I'm just going to fill this in. I'm going to make it look like a big rectangle and just play a game with myself. But I'm not going to stop swinging. I'm just going to take divots, and I'm going to try to make them all relatively the same depth. But what you'll find, just because of the nature of the geometry, is that the divots on the right side of the rectangle are going to be a little shallower, typically, than the divots on the left side. That's just the nature of kind of the golf club, the way the golf club's going to release, and the way the radius is going to expand going front to back from a face-on view, okay? Or even more accurately, looking perpendicular into the radius of the swing. All right, so let me get back to the neutral position, and I'm going to just start going through this, okay? There's my neutral point. Now I'm going to start picking different places for the club to land, just so I can start making this look like a rectangle. And you're going to see some subtle differences in the way I'm moving my body around so that I can orientate the shoulders and arm assembly to deliver the club in the right spot. But it's got to be decided before P5, right? Just kind of trucking through it. It's kind of a fun little drill to do, honestly. Okay, good enough. So I take this back over here from the player's point of view. Okay. So now we're looking at what it looks like now, just kind of a long rectangle. And I just decided in the first half of my backswing, as the club would come swinging back, I would see a spot of grass that was missing a divot, and I would just move the divot to that. But again, I had to figure it out before I got to P3 so I could aim the system during transition, okay? Here's kind of the down the line view. Just a nice long triangle. I don't know if you can see it that well. I actually made a relatively steep divot on the right side of the rectangle, so it doesn't quite look like this, but generally it'll typically look a little bit more shallow on the right side than the left side. But that all looks actually pretty uniform. But mission accomplished, just a fun little game to play. And here's one of the big takeaways from that, is that in order for me to get the club set up so I can aim the system, right? So from the face-on view, I'm doing stuff like this, and like this, and like this, and like this, and like this. In order to aim the system correctly, obviously, if you were to track what was happening with my GRFs under my feet, there would be there'd be a matchup between the way the amplitude of the signature and the signature trace as my center of gravity of my body moved around to different locations relative to my feet. My foot pressures would show me a signature that had a very interesting correlation with how I decided to deliver the low point of the radius. Now, the reason that's important is because ultimately your sense of what's happening at the feet is going to allow you to hit off the different slopes, because the different slopes, right, are essentially causing you to use different GRFs. Like, for instance, this is not a perfect simulation, but a simulation of the ball below your feet. Like, if it normally looks, if my face on view, hitting a stock shot, okay, we're talking about the signature going, obviously moving to the right, starting to head toward the heel, but not quite making it all the way to the heel, somewhat heelward, but not all the way to the heel. Then again, from this view, as I move the pressure trace to the right and slightly heelward, then diagonally toward the ball of the left foot as I start down, because I'm shifting pelvis laterally to set up rotation on the exit phase of the swing. And then as I start to move into rotational shear forces under the feet and then move into vertical, then what's going to happen, it's going to go out toward the ball left foot, and then it's going to hook a Yui and start to come back toward the left heel as I start to do the exit rotation portion. Well, the general flavor of that is going to be the same no matter what, but if I was going to hit off the side hill lie, so I'd be like this, let's say our ball below my feet, hitting up the hill, so lower on the right side, like this. Well, I could kind of simulate a little bit what that feels like by just sitting here like this, just sitting on my right leg. Right. This is why when you hit an uphill slope, it always feels like you're kind of falling back and sitting on your right leg, right? Because everything's pushing you down the slope. The CG is pushed really hard in your right foot. So if you were sitting here on a level lie and just hitting shots off your back foot like this is essentially what's happening when you're hitting uphill, right? You're just doing it all off your right leg. So there's no pelvis shift to your left because you can't do that up the hill unless you just want to stick the club into the ground. You've got to orientate the radius of the swing so it works up the slope, and just accept that you're going to get a higher launch angle with the same spin, but higher launch angle. And then you've got to adjust for what your distances are downrange and all that. But my signature would look the same. Like, it would come, excuse me, it would go a little bit more toward the heel. Then it would try to push toward the left side a little bit, but couldn't go very far because I'd have to keep pressure on my right foot because I'm being pushed down the slope. And then as I rotated out, it would hook a Yui. It would just look more compressed. Now the same thing down the hill. So down the hill, right? So here I'm on my right foot and I'm just swinging up the slope off my right foot. And downhill, it's like this. So now I'm on my left foot, right? And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have the club come down and chase down the slope. But again, I'm doing it all off my left foot. Again, signature looks the same, but now that signature has moved over and it's a micro version of itself on the left foot. And then on the side hills, it shifts more toward the heel when the ball's above your feet. And then on the downhill, it tends to shift more toward your toes. And what you're doing, like if you were like with the ball below your feet, you're basically trying to be pushed down this way and you're trying to reorientate yourself in some way around your CG to maintain some type of balance. But that's the nature of the way the slope is set up, is it's trying to push that pressure signature downhill. It's always trying to push it downhill, right? And so you've got to allow for that. But what it does is it makes a little bit of a restriction on your freedom of movement laterally, okay? Because you can't, like, certainly uphill and downhill, you can't use both legs at that point. You're going to have to choose, not only have to choose one leg, it has to be the correct leg, and the correct leg is, you couldn't hit the shot anywhere, but you couldn't hit it off your left foot if you're hitting up the hill, for obvious reasons. So, and you have some of the same kind of constraints when you're looking at side hills. So it's really the combination of what are the constraints on your foot pressures when you're standing on a side slope or an uphill slope or whatever, and how does that affect your orientation, change the radius? And then ultimately, I can talk about this in another video, it's what are you doing with face angle, right? What are you doing here? Are you working on when you start rotating the head? So you're changing by, in other words, are you trying to get this club in a more closed or open position and trying to use the same kind of release timing this way, same type of closure rate? Or actually, are you actually manipulating closure rate? And I think probably for each player, it's gonna be a little different what kind of mixture of those two things you do. But there's little drills and stuff you can do to manage that. But you build that on top of the fact you've already understood how to manipulate and change the radius of your swing. And that relates to what you're doing with your feet. Because my feet, depending on how I move my torso around, how I move my chest in relation to my pelvis, that changes what it feels like with your feet. So what I would encourage you to do if you ever do a drill like this is to not only be aware of your aim point and how you're aiming the arm and shoulder assembly, but what happens to your feet. And you'll do this instinctually. You don't even have to tell yourself, like, consciously you need to do this, and the pressure trace needs to move toward your ball of the left foot more or less. No, you'll just know how to do it. Like, you'll just start, I just got to make a divot there, and I got to make a divot there, and I got to make a divot there, and I got to make it back here, and I got to make it back to the right, and a little bit farther from me and in the middle. You'll just make the adjustments and just kind of be aware of how the foot pressures are changing while you change what the aiming system is doing for your target coordinates for how you're going to land the club on the ground. So all that stuff is mixed together, and when you get a sense of that intuitively, it's only when you're armed with that information, excuse me, that you can finally determine on the slopes where things get a little more complicated, what kind of angles can I deliver the ball confidently off that side slope or up slope or down slope condition that gives me a good reliable result. Like, you got to answer these questions before you answer that question. And lastly, but I mentioned it before, you've got to go out and practice on the course the side hill, the weird lies. You just got to go out and hit them. You got to take the golf ball you play with, and you got to go, like, literally reproduce it. You can't really do it on a range. You got to reproduce it on the golf course and hit 4 or 5, and then go to another hole when you get a few minutes and try another thing. I mean, when you're playing casual rounds, anytime you see a shot and you've got time, I mean, if you're keeping score with a ball, keep a score with one of the golf balls. But you really need to simulate in the wild the kind of conditions that are going to happen on the golf course when you play tournament golf. You know, whether it comes to just throwing the ball and giving yourself a weird lie, or letting the ball roll to wherever it's going to roll in nature, and then you have to hit it from there to a certain target on the golf course. That's obviously better than just sitting there and doing the repetitious practice on the range, unless you're just working on something that's purely technique. Like, if your coach is telling you to do something different, little motor pattern change, then sure, benign condition over and over again to get the reps in, to train the motor pattern, to get the pathway, the neural pathway in the central nervous system firing the same way every time, fine. But if you're training yourself for tournament golf and you're not working on something technique, you got to make as much practice as possible that simulates what you're really going to do when you're playing golf in a tournament. So, okay, so that's some more interesting stuff about understanding how the radius of the swing works, controlling it naturally through feel, not necessarily through, there's mechanical things happen, but it's really done through feel. And then try to associate that to how you would take that into battle. Keep grinding.